Shio Nagata, and welcome to the Supplanting and Duplicative Costs webinar. This webinar is prepared for you by the Tribal Financial Management Center and will be recorded and available within 2 weeks. A link will be emailed to all registrants. We hope that you enjoy the information shared with you today. And so now I'll turn it over to our tech specialist, Lydia Goodner.
Hello, my name is Lydia Goodner. I'm a tech specialist for today's session. I'm here to provide an overview of Zoom features and an introduction to TFMC's technical staff that are here to support your participation today. Before we jump into the training, let's look at some helpful features in Zoom. In the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll notice that all participant audio lines will remain muted for today's session. To the right of the audio icon, you will see a chat icon. Just click it to open your chat, and this is where you'll communicate with everyone on the platform today. So let's test it out. If you haven't already done this in the chat, please share with us what time zone or state you're joining us from today. I see we have several people that have already commented in there, so that's great. If you're connected by phone using a cell or landline and would like to submit your question during the session or at the question and answer portion of today's event, please submit your questions to tfmc@ovctfmc.org. Rosabelle Loya will be monitoring any technical support requests or questions received to that email address. And Jamil Evans will be providing technical support in the Zoom chat today. April Bird will be posting resources and relevant references to the slides in the chat window for the duration of the event. And the first message will be posted shortly that will include the presentation materials for today. As with all technology, we may experience a momentary lapse in the session. If that does happen, please be patient. The webinar presentation should resume shortly. Let's give a warm welcome to Brett Donahue.
Hello all. Give me 1 second as I unmute myself here. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brett Donahue and I'm currently serving as the Acting Deputy Director for the Tribal Division in the Office for Victims of Crime. We really do want to thank you so much for joining us on this webinar today and taking time out of your busy day. It looks like we actually have quite a few attendees and there's a lot of interest in this topic, which is really fantastic. As many of you know, OVC has had a significant increase in tribal funding over the past few years, which has allowed us to support the needs of victims in many tribal communities more than ever before. However, as a result, many tribes are now in the situation of managing multiple Department of Justice awards, and in some cases, several OVC awards at the same time. Therefore, we thought covering the topic of supplanting and duplicative costs would be relevant and helpful to our grantees as you move forward in planning and implementing your project. Unfortunately, I will not be able to stay for the entirety of today's webinar, although I do plan to hang on for a little bit. But the TFMC staff are ready to answer your questions. And I know one of my colleagues, Bonnie Robertson, is also here today and may be able to answer any OVC specific questions in the chat, or if she can be unmuted. I'm not really sure what the unmute situation is, but she's under Barbara Robertson. So if she can be unmuted, she can answer anything OVC specific. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. And now I will turn it over to April from TFMC to start the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Brett. We appreciate OVC's participation on today's webinar. I see a few familiar names from the tribal division among the participants, so thank you all for joining us today. Again, my name's April Bird. I'll be your producer for this event. And now I'll introduce our presenters for today's webinar, Tamara Fulweiler and Christine Moore. Tamara, I'll hand the presentation over to you so you and Christine can introduce yourselves.
Chakma, greetings. Hello, everyone. I'm Tamara Fulweiler. I am hoping that wherever you are joining us from today, that you're getting just the right resource to support your resilience through these challenging times. I hope that you and your loved ones are well and things are going well for your projects. I'm a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation of Oklahoma, and following April, I probably talk like I'm from Oklahoma, but I'm calling in from Washington State, where my closest relatives here today are known as the Puyallup Indian people, and they have been here since time immemorial as stewards of the lands and waters here. I always like to acknowledge their ancestors and their current leaders as they continue to occupy land that was taken from them under duress. I'm bringing with me my experience in working with many of you out in Indian country as the Chief Financial Officer at a tribal entity. I'm grateful to be here with you. I see some folks I know on the webinar. I'm happy y'all are here. I want to say hello to my co-presenter, Christine, out on the other coast.
Thank you, Tamara. So as Tamara mentioned, my name is Christine Moore. I'm joining you from Long Island, New York, and I'm a financial specialist with the Tribal Financial Management Center. I bring with me years of experience managing the financial aspects of federal, state, local government, and even some private sponsored awards. But most importantly, I do have specific experience managing the financial aspects of DOJ, OJP grants from the grantee side. So now that we have introduced ourselves, we'll provide a little bit more detail about the Tribal Financial Management Center, also known as TFMC. TFMC launched in the fall of 2018. We work very closely with your OVC grant managers and program TA providers to provide training and technical assistance, or TTA, as well as other resources to support American Indian and Alaska Native grantees and grant applicants. We provide assistance with the Tribal Victim Services Set-Aside Program, the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation, or CTAS, and State VOCA Assistance Formula Grant Programs. TFMC's support helps build a strong financial management foundation for each community's victim services program. We can assist grantees to refine and develop consistent, sustainable financial policies and procedures that enhance capacity to provide vital victim service programs in tribal communities. So TFMC supports OVC by providing intensive, individualized financial management TTA to OVC tribal grantees in coordination with their OVC grant managers. We do this by providing risk mitigation through individualized TA to address grantees' award conditions and/or risk factors. And a few ways we do this is by providing the individualized TA to grantees by answering applicants' questions regarding new solicitations and submission processes, enhancing and strengthening their existing financial policies and procedures, by supporting grantees in development of budget modifications and the accompanying grant award modifications, by addressing audit findings and corrective action plans, by conducting trainings and webinars like today on relevant grant financial management topics, and developing easy to use resources. So Tamara, I'll turn it back over to you to talk about the learning objectives for the webinar.
Okay, again, I thank all of you for joining us today. Our team has prepared this presentation based on the learning objectives you can now see on the screen. We'll present information prepared by subject matter experts like some of you and others, and we'll offer you resources to support your use of this information. We know you all are the experts on how these resources and information are best used by your tribal entity. But we hope today that you'll interact with us, with each other through our polls and in the chat box, use the features of the platform to share how the material applies to your work. We're also interested in hearing what else you might need and helping you successfully manage the financial aspects of your award. The presentation today has a lot of busy bees in it, so you'll probably hear some bad bee puns or jokes. Matter of fact, I have one for you. Let's see. What does the Professor Bee say when a student asks a question about the course? It's in the syllabus. And in our syllabus today, we're going to define the difference between supplementing and supplanting in a program project budget. We're going to talk about defining duplicative costs. We're going to go through analyzing budget examples, looking for supplementing, supplanting, and duplicative costs. And then we have some great strategies we pulled together from lots of folks working on projects like yours to help you avoid supplanting and duplicative costs. I think we'll go to a poll right away. Get you familiar with that feature because a lot of our work is going to be, oh, thanks for laughing. Somebody laughed at my joke. The first poll question is up on the screen for you. What type of entity do you represent? Folks are filling that out. And then Lydia, do I ask you for the analysis on the screen? I think technology, she can take a snapshot. There it is. Okay, most of you represent federally recognized tribes. A few of you are with tribal consortiums. I saw Marlene from the Alaska Native Justice Center on the line, and a few of you are from nonprofit corporations serving American Indians, Alaska Natives, and some others. All right, do y'all know how to click on the square at the top right-hand corner of the poll to make it come off your screen? And Lydia's put up poll number 2. Poll number 2, have you had any financial management training on supplanting versus supplementing? Okay, and I see lots of great participation. I'm very happy about that. It looks like a few more have not had training than have had training. So about 2/3 of you have not had training. So hopefully you'll find this helpful today. We'll have a lot of good resources for you, and I think that will be helpful too. So you can click on the square to make your poll go away. Christine, I think we should start with definitions. Do you want to help us with those?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Tamara. So this topic may be a source of stress for some, but we want to make sure you don't break out in hives about it. So we're going to start with some definitions. In general, this is a very important part of the federal grant financial management process. Supplanting can be reviewed during all phases of a grant, pre-award, post-award, monitoring, and audit. If a program manager thinks supplanting may have occurred, they may require the grantee to supply documentation to show that the reduction in non-federal resources occurred for reasons other than receipt or expected receipt of federal funds. For certain programs, a written certification from the grantee may be required by the awarding agency stating that federal funds will not be used to supplant tribal or local funds. Supplanting is an important topic because it may be grounds for suspension or termination of current and future federal funding, recovery of misused federal funds, and/or other remedies available by law. So let's talk in detail about what the terms mean. Then we'll do some polls based on different scenarios to make sure we can tell the difference between supplementing and supplanting. So award funds can be used to supplement local and tribal funds. You can use federal grant funds to build upon or add to your existing resources. Award funds cannot be used to supplant local tribal funds. You can't replace local funds that were already obligated with federal funds. When supplanting is not permitted, federal funds must be used to supplement existing tribal or local funds for program activities and may not replace tribal or local funds that have already been appropriated or allocated for the same purpose. As we just noted, award funds cannot be used to supplant the state, local, or tribal funds unless permitted by statute, DOJ financial guide, or program announcement or solicitation. As always, we always encourage you to refer to your best friend, the DOJ Grants Financial Guide, for more information, and the link will be provided to you in the chat. So another topic that's related to supplanting and supplementing are duplicative costs. Duplicative costs are costs paid when 2 or more funding sources are charged for the same costs. Good financial management practices and internal controls can help grantees to avoid charging the same cost to more than one funding source. To summarize, it's okay to build upon local resources to pay for programs and activities. However, it is not okay to pay for program or activities the tribal entity already obligated to pay for. Finally, it's not okay to charge the local cost of a program or activity to more than one funding source. We will go into a little more detail on supplementing, supplanting, and the duplicative costs in a little bit. But right now, I'm going to pass it back over to Tamara. So Tamara, if we can continue with some polling, we can see if our participants are kind of getting a hang of supplanting versus supplementing.
Okay, I just want participants, before we start with these poll scenarios and analysis, to believe in yourself. You can do this. I know you do it in your office every day. We're going to just go through some on the screen together, the kind of scenarios and situations that come up for you. So this is poll number 3. Your tribe pays for a telephone line at the health clinic where your victim services program is located. The program also pays for 2 cell phones so that the program advocates can forward their calls from the health clinic telephone line when they're not in the office. Is this supplementing or supplanting? I see answers starting to come in. So there's an existing telephone line, and then you add to it another feature so that you can support your advocates in the field. Good, good, right? That's supplementing. That is adding to the tribe already pays for the main telephone line. They used federal grant funds to pay for cell phones, which will extend that telephone line beyond the four walls of the building where it previously existed alone. So the cell phones built on the landline, that's supplementing. Very good. We're going to go on to the next scenario in poll number 4. Last year, your tribal entity budgeted general funds to pay salary fringe for a half-time legal advocate. With 6 months remaining in the budget period, your tribal entity received a DOJ grant to pay for a full-time legal advocate. It paid 100% of the legal advocate salary fringe from the DOJ award. So you already had general funds to pay for a half-time legal advocate, and then you got a DOJ grant and use 100% of the DOJ funds to pay for the legal advocate salary and fringe. In this scenario, supplanting has occurred because the tribal entity used federal funds to replace existing tribal funds that were in place in an approved budget period for the last 6 months. Supplanting would not have occurred if the tribal entity paid half of the salary fringe costs from its general fund and half from the new federal award. But if you replace all of the local tribal funds that were budgeted in an approved budget with those grant funds, you are supplanting. Good job. The majority of you got that. Thank you. All right, let's try another one. This comes on your screen as poll number 5. Pretty straightforward questions. Supplanting can happen when a federal award replaces tribal local funds for an existing program activity. A tribal entity justifies withdrawing funding for an existing program or activity because a federal award is made. The availability of a federal award is used as justification by a tribal entity for not starting a needed program or service. Yep, and as you read through those, I saw your votes kind of changed. You've gotten to all of the above. Supplanting can happen in any of these situations, so it is all of the above. Nicely done. Nicely done for poll number 5. We've got poll number 6 on the screen for us. We're going to look at this scenario to see if it's supplementing or supplanting. My poll pops up right in the middle of my screen, makes it really hard to read. I moved it over. A victim services program has 2 crisis advocates. It receives a federal grant to hire a legal advocate. Instead of hiring an inexperienced advocate for the legal advocate position, the program wants to use one of the crisis advocates already there who's also an attorney, but has not been doing legal advocacy for their program clients. Then it wants to backfill the crisis advocate position when the advocate that's there moves to the new position. It wants to backfill that position with using its original budgeted funds. So would that be supplementing or supplanting? When you have a locally, tribally budgeted position, it becomes empty and you backfill it using money from your original budget. Okay, the program used its own funds to supplement the new federal award because the new program resources went to the new funding went to new activities, but they used their local budget to backfill in their original positions, right? So supplementing is the correct answer for that scenario. That was a little more challenging for folks. So I think the key word is local funds to backfill. That's a concept. I see it in lots of DOJ instructions that when you have approved local funds and you have to backfill, that you use the original source of funding when you do backfill and you document that. So that's a pretty common question. All right. The next scenario comes to us as poll question number 7. And supplementing or supplanting. Here we go. Again, the tribal entity approved a general fund budget to purchase 3 new laptops for its victim services program. So we're going to purchase something for a program. It's tribal general fund. During the budget year, The program received new federal grant to support the Victim Services Program. So the program used the new federal award to purchase the 3 laptops it needed. Those laptops had been in an approved local budget before they were purchased with federal grant funds. Supplementing or supplanting. The laptops were in an approved existing local tribal budget. 97%, right? A plus, A plus. That is definitely supplanting. You can't use new funds, new federal funds, to go back and buy something that was in an approved local budget, because that is supplanting and it's not allowed. You guys did great with those. I hope these were helpful scenarios, the kind of things that you face in your office every day. Christine, you want to kind of go through the next step with us?
Absolutely. And Tamara, awesome job, and awesome job to all of you for sticking it out through all of those poll questions and getting almost all of them correct. So this next section, there's been a lot of buzz about it. So we're going to jump into duplicative costs and how budget files can help prevent them. Every grantee is responsible for sound financial management of federal funding. To maximize the benefit of that funding, those responsible for the victim services programs must constantly monitor their respective budgets and adjust as needed to meet their approved program goals. Many programs have more than one source of funding. Using a funder budget spreadsheet, which Tamara will go into a little bit more detail on shortly. So using a funder budget spreadsheet can help ensure the correct expenses are being charged only once and to the correct funding source. Also, it's a best practice to reconcile budget and accounting records at least monthly. So now we'll go into more detail about tracking revenue sources or revenue source allocation worksheet in a few slides. Having the appropriate procedures in place up front will help prevent the need for a plan B to fix any issues with duplicative costs in the future. If there is more than one funding source that supports your program or activity, starting with a really clear budget and detailed budget narrative should make it clear which expense belongs within each award budget. We'll provide a couple of tools to think about and or utilize to help prevent duplicative costs. So OVC, or the Office of Victims of Crime, provides a budget detailed worksheet template, also sometimes referred to as a BDW, which you may already be familiar with or find useful. Just a quick side note that for some of the newer awards, this budget detail worksheet is now embedded in the Just Grant system, but it would still be useful to have an actual budget file like this BDW for your records. So we're just going to review a few basics of this budget detail worksheet. This example of a budget file is where you will enter each individual expense, as well as the budget narrative for each cost category. There are 9 tabs to this file that you can see at the bottom of the image on your screen. The first one is where you'll have the instructions. So this sheet has the instructions for the entire workbook and can be used as a reference while completing the rest of the document. This next screen shows you just a snippet of one section of this budget file. You'll see that there's a section to list out each individual expense, as well as a narrative to provide more detail on those expenses. Providing that detail in the narrative will help someone reviewing the budget distinguish between 2 similar expenses. So for example, if there are 2 positions with the same title, the narrative should provide additional information to clarify that it's not duplicative, that there's a victim advocate number 1 and a victim advocate number 2. If your program has more than one funding source, as we mentioned earlier, you may need to have a tool such as a funder budget spreadsheet to ensure you charge the correct allowable cost to the proper funding source. So now I'm actually going to pass it back over to Tamara to go into that funder budget spreadsheet in a little bit more detail.
I know that in your office, you probably have tools that you use to pencil things out. This is one that someone we worked with gave to us. We thought it might be helpful. It may be small on your screen. I know you're going to get a copy of this, this PowerPoint, so you'll be able to access perhaps a larger version of this. I hope that you're able to see it okay. We know some of you have multiple years of tribal victim services set aside and some CTAS. And so this is a scenario that I walked through someone with using what we call the funder budget spreadsheet. So they started in their program year with an advocate that had partial funding from their tribal victim services set aside, from tribal funds, and from court fines. So the budget allocation for this advocate was $40,000. You can see that under the salaries part of this worksheet. We're not going to really work with the fringe or the rent, so you don't have to really work with about that. We're really going to talk about just this advocate position. So I'm going to ask him to take us to the next slide. So the tribe gets a Tribal Victim Services Set Aside Award to hire a full-time program outreach advocate. It's one person, 100% of it is charged across the line, that TVSSA, tribal funds, court fines. But now they get a CTAS award to hire a half-time case manager. But this is a really small program. And the case management work at 20 hours a week is going to be done by that outreach advocate who was already in place. Well, we know we already have 100% of that outreach advocate's work funded to other funding sources. So when a new funding source comes in to do new work, we have to think about how we charge that person's time, because the person still only has a 1.0 FTE, right? So now we're looking at the same spreadsheet as the first one. We have the advocate on the line at $40,000, $20,000 in TVSSA, $10,000 in tribal funds, $10,000 in court fines. We've added a case manager line to our salaries, and we've put in the funders $10,000. Okay, let's go to the next slide now. Hang in there with me. So in this slide, you can see that our lines are out of balance now because the amounts for one person add up to $50,000 and their salary is only $40,000. So we have too much money in the advocate line for funding and not enough money in the case manager line for funding. So let's go to the next slide. So now we have taken the $10,000 from CTAS and put it in the case manager line. We need to go one more. You can see that highlighted in yellow there. Can you go forward a slide? Okay. Sometimes when we're, we'll go backwards a slide then. Sometimes when we do slide decks and multiple people work on them, we miss slides when we reshuffle them. And what I'm looking at here is a missed slide. So what will have to happen for this $10,000 in the CTAS line is, in order to accommodate that and make $40,000 for one person doing both jobs, you have to reduce the TVSSA line. You can't charge a full-time salary for the advocate to the TVSSA tribal funds, court fines, and $10,000 to CTAS, because then you're charging a $40,000 position, $50,000 worth of funders. So in this, if the correct slide were in here, there would be, it would say TVSSA 10,000, tribal funds 10,000, court fines 10,000. The line for the advocate would be 30,000, and that would represent the work they're going to do there. And then you would have 10,000 on the CTAS line for the case manager, and that would represent paying that advocate for the case management work they're going to do. We will get corrected slides out to you. I apologize for this. If you could see me, my face is probably as red as the X on this avoid duplicative costs slide, but we will get the correct demonstration slides out to you. I sincerely apologize to that. Lydia, let's go to poll 8. This is a summary on which of the following is appropriate activity in federal grant financial management. To supplant, which replaces, to supplement, to build upon, or duplicative, to charge more than once. It's like a pop quiz. You guys are scoring 100% on your pop quiz. That's awesome. Well done. Thank you. Thank you so much. So the appropriate activity is to supplement. The OFTMC group provides a guide sheet. That was the slide that I saw coming up. You can access and download it from the link on the slides. And I don't know if someone wants to drop that in the chat box so people can download it there. And I'm going to pass the deck back to Christine and ask her if she'll take over for a moment.
Of course, and thank you so much, Tamara, because that funder budget spreadsheet, or having that spreadsheet that summarizes all the different sources of funding for a program, is really, really helpful. So the next couple slides, we're just going to review some strategies for avoiding supplanting and duplicative costs. And typically we don't like to read directly from the slides, but there's some really good information here. So I'm just going to go through it really, really quickly. So the first strategy, include language in your procurement policy to ensure federal funds are not used to pay for things your tribal entity is already obligated to pay for with local or tribal funds. And the next one is ensure that all grant staff understand the difference between supplementing and supplanting duplicative costs and are aware of the related entity policies applicable to that topic. Keep really good written records to support budgets as they are developed, including a funder budget spreadsheet. Reconcile accounting records to your budget each month. That'll help make sure that each expense is where it's supposed to be. Keep minutes of meetings where budgets are reviewed and approved. And that's helpful because if there is a decrease, let's say to a tribal budget where you take out an advocate position, the meeting minutes will explain why that removal occurred, so that if it's later funded by a federal source, you have documentation to show that it wasn't supplanting, that it was for other reasons that it was removed from that tribal budget. And lastly, separately store files for each grant with individual accounting tracking systems or spreadsheets. To continue, just a couple more or a few more. Maintain job announcements and other documentation that demonstrates the tribal entity took active and timely steps to backfill locally funded positions. Train governing body and staff on the difference between supplementing and supplanting. Develop and use internal controls to avoid duplicative costs, things like the funder budget spreadsheet, and ensure that all necessary staff are aware of these policies. Set up budget categories for each grant award, personnel, equipment, supplies. Track all expenses and reimbursements accurately and consistently in your budgets. And finally, keep copies of resolutions, memos, emails, meeting minutes, and other communication with directings about reducing local tribal resources like we just touched on before. So this final slide for the presentation portion of this webinar. Next slide, please. Is just a summary of the learning objectives that Tamara had gone through in the beginning. So let's just review them really, really fast. So the goal of the webinar, or our goal that we wanted for you from this webinar, is to be able to define the difference between supplementing and supplanting in a program or project budget, define duplicative costs, analyze budgeting examples for supplementing, supplanting, and duplicative costs, and review those strategies for avoiding the supplanting and duplicative costs. So that concludes our portion of the presentation. We're going to hand it back over to April to conclude today's session and start off this Q&A section.
Thank you, Christine. We have provided a lot of information today, and we hope it will be helpful. We try to develop resources and learnings that are beneficial to you. So if there are other topics that would be useful, please send those topics to us. We also offer technical support. So for additional information or assistance, you can contact us at tfmc@ovc, tfmc.org, or by calling 703-462-6900. So if you are connected by phone and using a cell phone or landline today, and you want to participate in the question and answer portion, please send your questions in to tfmc@ovctfmc.org. And we will be happy to get those questions in as quickly as possible and answer those for you today. And also today, as Brett had mentioned at the beginning, is Barbara Robinson will be helping us. She's with OVC as a grant manager. She'll be helping us today answer some of the questions that come in through the chat box. All right, so our first question is, how do I prevent supplanting? Tamara, would you like to answer that one?
I would, and I'll reinforce what Kristen offered in the strategies. I will say document, 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 because if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And just knowing the details about each of your funding agency, use some tool to help you track what's getting paid for by each of your funders. Keep your notes and your emails and keep it as well organized as you possibly can. That will help you prevent it from happening, and also be able to show to document that it didn't happen when you're managing multiple grants around the same project.
All right, the next question. Our grant writer says sometimes it's okay to supplant using federal funds. They do it in our education program. Why can't we do it with OVC funds? Emery,
Well,
that one? Go
yeah,
ahead.
that's a good question, April. Sorry, I kind of jumped in there. Like, we know this happens. Each funding opportunity, the notice of funding availability, states up front whether the grant you're applying for prohibits supplanting. And I just looked at the tribal VSSA ones. There's a very specific statement before, I think it's called attachment A or schedule A, that has the allowable and unallowable costs, that supplanting is not allowable. And if you have any questions, it's always better to be safe than sorry. So you can ask someone at TFMC or ask your grant manager.
Thank you. We also have a question that came in through the chat box. Is BIA funding considered tribal or local funding? Ms. Robertson, would you like to take that one?
BIA funding?
Yes. Is BIA funding considered tribal or local funding?
Well, isn't tribal and local fund? Well, it's federal funding, so it would follow whatever federal rules the BIA follows. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the difference. Yeah, it would be considered the federal funding. Yeah, I would look and see whatever the parameters are for your BIA funding.
All right, thank you, Ms. Robertson. All right, our next question. If we have a budget with state VOCA funds for our victim services program, can we replace those funds with a new federal award? Christine? Christine may be having difficulties right now. Tamara, do you want to take that one?
I'm so sorry, I was muted.
That's okay. Go
My
ahead.
apologies, everybody. So for this one, the simple answer would just be no. It would actually be supplanting in this case, because federal funds are not available to fund an activity program that already has an existing funding source. If it was you were adding to it, that would be okay, but in this case, you can't replace it.
Christine, this is Tamara, and I'm going to jump in here and ask Barbara to sort of listen to this too. So when I heard the question about BIA funding and tribal local, this is how I saw it in my head. If I have an approved budget at my tribal entity that has BIA funding in it, and later I get a DOJ award, can I replace BIA funding in a locally tribally approved budget with DOJ funding?
I would say no.
And that's what I would say too. Thanks, Barbara. So once it's in a budget, it's considered a tribal local fund. So once you've got an approved local budget, that's what we're talking about, that you can't bring in new federal awards and replace something that your tribal entity already has funding for, really, regardless of the source when we're talking about DOJ new awards.
Thank you for clarifying that question, Tamara. All right, on to the next question. What happens if our federal funder suspects we are supplanting? Tamara?
Sure. So we mentioned in the presentation that if a question of supplanting arises, you will be asked to show written documentation that your entity's reduction in your non-federal, your tribal or local non-federal resources occurred for reasons other than the receipt or expected receipt of those new federal funds. The strategies that Kristen outlined in the webinar can really help you. I think that's probably the best thing to share, April. I guess I just would think for just a second, like, what would your documentation look like, right? So written documentation. So it might be the resolutions of your council, budget committee work papers, tribal council minutes, operations meeting minutes. It might be like the council or your tribal administrator issuing a directive to reduce operating budget. So it could be emails, it could be memos, it could be minutes, it could be work papers. So things, all of those things could be considered written documentation. Sorry for kind of going on about that.
That's okay. We can see your passion. I love it. All right, next question. Are grantees encouraged to supplement their federal awards? Christine?
Sure. So absolutely. So the goal of the Tribal Victim Services Set Aside Award is to actually improve the services for victims of crime in tribal communities. The grants are made to increase the tribal entity's resources available to provide those victim services. So again, they're not meant to replace the tribal, local, or state resources available, but they are absolutely encouraged to supplement those programs.
All right, thank you. Who can I call if I have a question how to plan for supplementing rather than supplanting with our grant funds?
And I will take that one too, April. So if you have any questions, you can call the Tribal Financial Management Center or TFMC using that contact information that was provided in the webinar. For answers to specific questions regarding supplanting, OJP applicants and grantees should contact the OJP Office of the Chief Financial Officer, or OCFO, their customer service center at 1-800-458-0786 or ask.ocfo@usdoj.gov, and we'll put that information right into this chat too, so you have it.
All right, thank you so much. All right, looks like we have some discussion about 638 monies in the chat. Let me see.
I'm wondering, April, if it would be helpful if TFMC did a page, resource page on 638 funds. So there may be experts on our team who are experts on 638 funds once they become contracted and how they become local tribal funds and how they're impacted by supplanting. I'm not an expert. I don't know if Christine is, or if Barbara or someone else on the phone is able to talk about those.
So I think this might be a very good topic for us to kind of dig into a little bit more detail on offline, and then we can definitely get back to everyone with a little bit more detail. But we definitely want to have a little bit further discussion on it first.
And thank you to the people in the chat box for bringing it up, because that's something we could have thought about prior and it didn't come to us, but I know it's a job reality for you all. So thanks for bringing that issue up. That's a great question. Great example.
Great discussion. Yes, okay, Don Jackson says compact funding can be considered non-federal match. However, there are regs on programs in 25 CFR. So is that also in reference to the 638 monies?
I don't see Don's comment in the chat box, but I believe that's 638 monies. Does anyone disagree with that?
Okay, well, we can get more information as we dig into it more. I also am not an expert in 638, so it's a good learning opportunity for me as well. And we will put that together and get that out as soon as possible. Great conversation. So one more question that we have currently. If you have any other questions, please go ahead and continue putting them in the chat box, or of course, emailing them to us. So a question was asked is, will this webinar be recorded? And yes, it's being recorded and notifications will be sent to all participants within 2 weeks. All right, I'm going to check the chat box one more time. And it looks like we have some 638 experts. And yes, we will send that recorded to everyone. All right, so if you have any other questions and you send those to us, we will try to get the answers to you as quickly as possible. Thank you all for your questions. OVC has requested that we share these types of questions with them, and they will follow up with a written response if we get questions that we cannot answer in our email or chat box after the meeting. So here are some references, some additional references on today's topic. And so TFMC serves tribal communities across 5 different time zones. To accommodate our grantees, our main hours of operation are spread out to maximize our availability. As you can see, our virtual support center is open from noon to 7 p.m. in the Eastern time zone. And then just depending on your time zone, Mountain would be 10 to 5, Pacific 9 to 4, Central 11 to 6, Alaska 8 to 3. TFMC staff are available beyond those times as our staff is located throughout the country. But you can call or email us to connect at your convenience. So please look for a survey that will be sent immediately after the conclusion of this webinar. The webinar has been recorded and will be available to you within 2 weeks. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you and working with you to better serve our victims of crime. Have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.